The only difference between rest and laziness is whatever happens right before it. Maybe you've walked in on someone who was laying on a couch and you hadn't seen them in a while and you assumed, oh, they're just lazy. But what you didn't see was the hours of work they put in before it. So the only difference between rest and laziness is what happens right before it. If you feel like you've done worthwhile work, then you can rest. But there's part of us that wonders, is my rest just laziness? Well, to further compound that problem, let's look at one of the very first times rest is mentioned in the Bible. In fact, we don't have to go very far. It's in Genesis chapter 2. And it takes us to the very first day that Adam and Eve were alive on this earth. God created them on day 6. And then something interesting happens on day 7. If Adam and Eve took their cue from God, then what would they have done on day 7, the first full day of their life in this world? They would have done nothing. Here's what Genesis chapter 2 says. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. If Adam and Eve had taken their cue from God, then on the first full day of their life, they would have done nothing. They would have rested right along with God. And that takes us to the second big truth that will help us get better rest. Your second truth for better rest is simply this: rest at the beginning. It seems counterintuitive to us because usually rest is something we do at the end. It has to be deserved. But if Adam and Eve had taken their cue from God, then they actually rested before they did anything. And here's what rest can look like at the beginning. You see, if Adam and Eve had rested on that first full day of their life, they wouldn't have been doing nothing. And that's important. Rest is not doing nothing. But rather, what they would have been doing is appreciating all of God's work that they had no ability to do. They would have looked at the creation around them and acknowledged, wow, God did some amazing work, and here we are to enjoy it. So I wonder, what would it look like for you to rest at the beginning, just like Adam and Eve would have if they took their cue from God? I like to picture a sprinter who's getting ready for the race. And all the sprinters are out on the track and they're getting ready to go. And then when they are told that the race is about to begin, what do they all do? They get down, put their hands in the right place, get their feet on the block, and they enter this resting position, but it actually prepares them for what's next. And that's what good rest does for us. When we rest at the beginning, it gets us prepared for what's next. And when you do that, here's what it might look like. When you rest at the beginning, maybe you take a pause before you work and before you do anything to examine your personal motives. You look at yourself and you say, what I'm about to do, is it for my glory or for God's glory? Is it to serve my interests or to serve others and love them? And is the goal of this to celebrate what I can do, or is the goal of my work to celebrate what God can do through me and through the gifts he gave me? When you rest at the beginning, it keeps you mindful of what you can and cannot do. And it's so important to rest at the beginning so you can remember what God did for you. Who you are is not measured by your work or your accomplishments. Who you are is measured by what Jesus did for you on the cross. And when he died for you, it's like you were put in a tomb. And when he rose from the dead, that's where your life was unleashed. And that's so important for us to remember so that we don't get distracted by things that go on in everyday life. Don't get so busy by your work that you forget the most important work that your Father in heaven did for you when he sent his son Jesus into this world. So there's no rules or regulations for how to rest at the beginning. Maybe it's the beginning of a day or a week or a month where you sit down and you pause for a moment and you just rest. You rest as you prepare for what's next by remembering what God has already